and thank you to the organizers for putting together this wonderful event and inviting me. Do I have a clicker to switch to? It's one of my doctoral student colleagues say, you're not Professor of Media and Communication Studies, but Media Archaeology, because I'm technologically challenged. But I will manage, I hope it's simple enough. What I will talk about today is in some ways very different from what we talked about in the morning sessions, but related. I will talk about the contextual realm of what informs the city, so to speak, and it is very much related to what Nicholas talked about. So it has to do with the contextual scope that defines the city and the national realm. And that contextual realm, or the theory of context, I will link to geopolitics, as I will get to briefly at the end of my talk. As scholars of critical geopolitics say, we cannot just talk about context. Context needs to be informed by theory, and that theory to them is critical geopolitics, and that is what I take on board here in parts of my work. It has to do with the small screens rather than the big screens in the city that influence consciousness, and I'm talking about TV screens, mobile screens, where people receive their information from screens that mediate. It has to do with positionality and expressivity in the city. It has to do with imagining the city, and as we know, that imagination is shifting all the time, it's flux. And that imagination, of course, is being used or manipulated in various ways by political parties, especially the far right at the moment, as we know. And it has to do with how the city is in dialogue with the media. It has to do with what we see as part of street art and graffiti in Europe. That is part of my project, as I will briefly talk about in a minute. It's part of street exhibitions and how those feed into and from the media. We see a lot of that in Stockholm nowadays. Street art exhibitions about the Roma, about refugees, trying to inform the public. And of course, there's a big media discourse around that. It has to do with what defines the city today and how it is changing into tomorrow, who are there, invisible, and who are not. It is part of an effort on my part and my colleagues who are part of this project, who are part of this project. The project is ending at the end of this year, involved with the project entitled Cosmopolitanism from the Margins, Mediations of Expressivity, Social Space, and Citizenship. And the case studies we looked at, it was, just to say a few words about the project, it was a 4-year project originally that sort of extended into the 5th year. It was funded by the Swedish Research Council. This is the book we wrote together, our findings that came out at the end of last year. Basically, it deals with the departure points are the generative power of popular media and other cultural forms, such as television, sports, etc., in informing citizenship, morality, politics, amongst other notions, of course. More specifically, we're seeking to reconcile embodied and spatial articulation with cultural citizenship and cosmopolitanism. That's what the case studies were dealing with. And trying to re-explore the empirical applicability of the theory of cosmopolitanism. As people talk about it, it's a very sort of contested theory or realm of theory, as we know, cosmopolitanism, and its empirical applicability has been questioned. So what we tried to do in this project was to do various case studies, one being graffiti, looking at graffiti and street art in Stockholm and seeing what kinds of subjectivities or positionalities are coming to fore in Stockholm through graffiti and street art. And Stockholm has a very strict policy when it comes to graffiti, which is unlike the national image. Sweden sort of oozes out this, liberal open space. They had a zero tolerance policy, especially in Stockholm. Even though in some other cities they had walls dedicated to graffiti, in Stockholm it was absolutely banned, and it is subject to, it is penalized quite harshly, actually. 2 years ago, when Social Democrats took office, they lifted the ban, but in practice, as we found out through our interviews with graffiti doers or writers, as they call themselves, it didn't really mean much in practice. And the other case study we did was, one I had formerly, that was linked to this project, was looking at migrant communities in Stockholm and their mediations in everyday life. And the third one had to do with community art centers, halls, art halls, or museums, and how these places, curators and those who are working there in charge, were creating spaces for LGBT communities and refugees. And now, as an offshoot of that, it became quite prominent actually during our interviews. I would like to look at other identities within the refugee community and how these places are creating forms of, or venues of expression or existence for these people. Of course, in the media, in general, sort of a cultural imagination, we take refugees as a generic sort of category, as if they do not have differences within themselves. So, my doctoral student colleague, who's writing a wonderful dissertation actually as part of this project on graffiti in Stockholm, has this wonderful collection of images, which I'm not going to be able to show today as part of this presentation, but this is one of them, the pictures that he took. This is basically going against the zero tolerance law, organizing and putting forth a movement. And this says, we see black, we see white, despite colored whiteness, all this racism. This is, I included this, but it is quite emblematic actually, because race, interestingly enough, doesn't exist in Swedish legal discourse. So we don't talk of race. But of course, racism is very visibly and forcefully there. And in line with what has been happening in Europe over the few years, or over the decade, you could say, in Sweden as well, the far right has been on the rise, which came as a surprise to many, actually, although it has been there for quite some years. In the last elections, the far right party, which is called Sweden's Democrats, came out as the third biggest party. And we have elections again in 2018, and of course, they're not going to go down. Their popularity, unfortunately, is rising. And Sweden is also significant, like Germany, in the sense that it accepted over 200,000 refugees during the Syrian, what is called the refugee crisis, which is quite a large number considering Sweden is only 9.5 million, but at the end they came out and said we cannot take any more, which has been very controversial, of course, in Sweden. And of course, the far-right party very much manipulated that, the intake of refugees, and they made a lot of hay on the back of that, in that discourse. So, this is, before I go into the media discourse, this is quite a phenomenal thing actually that happened in August 2015. This is one of the major tube stations in Stockholm, in central Stockholm. It's called the Östermalm station. And the center-right, far-right party, Sweden's Democrats, they were actually authorized, they took permission to use the metro space for this. Just this August 5th, I think it was in 2015. Sorry about the mess here in Sweden. Basically, this apologetic discourse targeting foreigners, obviously, because August is high season for tourists in Stockholm, and you can read the signs our government want to what is needed. I was there actually in town that day with my little daughter, and we couldn't even approach the station. We had to walk home. It was quite a huge event, and there was a police cordon, and of course demonstrations outside of the station, and it was very much controversial as to how come they were given this permit. And then of course there were media discourse around, well, it is part of free speech and public discourse, etc. So what I will do, I think it'll, if I managed, as I said, technologically will flow by so after this point, and I will talk about the media discourse, framing all these issues in
What year is this?
Sorry?
What year is this?
This is 1931, 30. Well, I cannot see the date here, and I have in my records, but not here. I think it is 1935 or
Probably
38, I think.
probably
I'm
37,
definitely sure
30.
it's 1935 or somewhere between
Right.
35 and 39. So, as we all know, things have happened in the United States and the UK after Brexit. And I guess it would be borderline misconduct on my part after talking about the context in Sweden not to begin this part of the talk, at the very least noting the obvious relationship between the rhetoric flowing from certain portions of the UK and the US political environment, and what I will be discussing today in relation to Europe in general and in Sweden in particular. So I'll try to make sense of the contextual realm of the city in the next 20 minutes or whatever time, whatever many minutes I have left. Over the past decade, there has been a noted increase in publications addressing political, cultural, and legal cosmopolitanism. The cosmopolitan vision, which Nikos talked about also, which in itself a contested and open-ended notion, refers to a desired ethical orientation that may or may not arise in response to the demands of a society marked by diversified forms of complex connectivity or multiple interconnectivities. It is a self-reflexive ethos that opposes the cultural othering and racialization, subjectification of people, and conservative nationalism. The transformations of today's media spaces and their architectures involve increased levels of flows and an intense mediatization of everyday life. As Harvey notes, the Kantian notion of cosmopolitanism as a universal sense of acceptance and hospitality between outsiders or strangers was rooted in its understanding of how spatial relations were changing and how we envisioned increased human mobility and border crossings. The Kantian version of cosmopolitanism, of course, is one that concerns world travelers with cultural and material capital. Although we know all too well that many of those globetrotters with capital that we encounter at world's airports today are amongst the least cosmopolitan people in terms of their values and beliefs. Becoming increasingly more entangled with physical space, questions of privilege and power also become more pronounced. People are differently positioned in relation to material access to media infrastructures and networks, and of course in the city in terms of their ability or capacity to have access to the city infrastructure. They are positioned differently in relation to geopolitical space as well as social and cultural space and media space. The past 2 years have been marked by a series of shifts in the representation of refugees and migrants in European media. There has been a marked tension in most big European cities. These shifts, however, must be seen in relation to a number of fundamental underlying components of media coverage of refugees, migrants, and what has been termed the refugee crisis. So media obviously play a big role, and media space play a big role in how we understand refugees, just like they played a big role in making Trump win, I would say. In a December 2015 report from the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which looked at press coverage of the refugee and migrant crisis in 5 European countries, EU countries actually, Germany, Spain, Italy, the UK, and Sweden, a number of key conclusions regarding the coverage were drawn. First, there are wide variations in how the press in different countries report on asylum and immigration. Interestingly, Sweden's press system was noted in the report as being the most positive toward refugees and migrants, with a preponderance of humanitarian themes, 3 examples where refugees and migrants were framed as a threat, and strong advocacy of a more liberal and humane EU asylum and immigration policy. And in Sweden, we don't have the kind of tabloid press that exists, for instance, in the UK. This was in marked contrast to the UK press, where right-wing papers expressed a unique hostility to refugees and migrants. Second, there are significant differences in the level of variation between national press systems. The most homogeneous press systems were those of Spain, Italy, and Sweden, where newspapers tended to use the same language, report on the same themes, and feature the same explanations and response. The UK was the exception in this study with the most polarized coverage. Third, there were few instances where reporting focused on the benefits that asylum seekers and migrants could bring to host countries. The few stories that did address potential benefits tended to appear in the German and Swedish press, the two countries that by far took in the largest share of refugees in the EU region. Finally, the rise of the far right was reflected in what was described as the uneven media coverage. Overall, far-right parties were primarily reflected in the media systems of countries where these parties have political representation, for example, Italy and Sweden. In Germany, where the majority of recent refugees are located, far-right parties were not given any significant access to or representation in the media. These are, of course, the broad brushstrokes of European media coverage and what people are seeing on small screens. But as I have mentioned above, the coverage of the influx of refugees and migrants to Europe over the past few years has also been marked by a number of emotive shifts, from early aggression and indifference to appeals to humanitarian sentiment, to city-based initiatives by art and activist groups, to pragmatic politics. We're organizing a symposium in a few months in March, looking at these initiatives in the city, which are, the broad umbrella term is Andre Hemmet, which means the second home. These are basically art and activist groups which come together to create spaces again, or to provide help and support to refugees, and basically to take on where national, institutional, and municipal initiatives fail or are not enough. The UNHCR report I just discussed made note of the particular hostility present in segments of the UK media toward migrants and refugees. While outlets such as the Daily Mail and Daily Express are not representative of European media as a whole, it is nevertheless important to note the disproportionate influence of these papers have held internationally due to their political economy and language. In the United States, for example, critics of the intake of refugees often link back to the Daily Mail for horror stories about refugees swarming into the UK or exploiting the British benefit system and ruining iconic cities such as London. And these outlets expand their influence beyond their national borders by covering issues related to refugees and migrants in countries other than the UK, with coverage of migrant camps in Calais and scare stories about refugees sexually assaulting women in Sweden as staples of the UK xenophobic press. Expressions of xenophobic hostility, such as those from the UK, were not always counterbalanced by expressions of empathy and solidarity, as we know. For a period after the start of the arrival of refugees from Syria, the fact that large numbers of these people were drowning in the Mediterranean Sea was underreported. In the first 6 months of 2015, the International Organization for Migration reported that just under 2,000 refugees had died trying to cross the Mediterranean. During the same 6-month period in 2016, the number jumped to just over 3,000, a 50% increase in fatalities in just 1 year. In 2016, on the particularly dangerous route between Libya and Italy, 1 out of every 23 refugees attempting to cross the sea would die in the attempt. The relative media silence on refugee deaths at sea, given the numbers that began to emerge during 2015, ended with the death of the 3-year-old Syrian boy, Alan Kurdi, which was highly mediatized, and that links back to the power of the media. The image of his lifeless body washed upon the shores of Western Turkey spread widely throughout the international media, with Kurdi becoming a posthumous symbol for the perils and tragedy facing refugees, triggering a wave of reporting, with the story dominating much of the European media. And also there were graffiti examples in Stockholm actually representing that in his body. And of course, there's a symbolic violence inherent in that image. Would we see that image heavily mediated if he were a white Christian boy? But it made an impact, we cannot deny that either. At almost precisely the same time as Kurdi's death, large numbers of refugees began to arrive in Germany, many via train. Another staple of European media at this time were stories of how ordinary Germans and citizens in other European countries were welcoming refugees at stations with food, clothing, and in some cases, offering housing. The heart-wrenching tragedy of the Kurdi image, this little boy, combined with the feel-good aura of the refugees' welcome theme, contributed to the sense of community and solidarity with refugees, particularly during the latter months of 2015. Of course, the solidarity and sense of community was relatively short-lived as two issues intervened. Terrorism and Domestic Politics, a series of terrorist attacks from late 2015 through mid-2016 in Paris, Brussels, and Nice, major cities in Europe, resulting in the deaths of almost 250 citizens, drained some of the emotive media coverage of refugees and put issues of national security back on the agenda, and of course fed back into the agendas of the far-right parties. Of course, in all three attacks, there was no evidence that any of the attackers were refugees, with virtually all of the suspect citizens of the countries in question. This, however, did not stop mainstream media organizations from speculating on the link between refugee arrivals, urban environments, and national security, thus playing into the hands of xenophobic politicians and media outlets, straining at the leash to link immigration and terrorism. Even killings not linked to terror, such as the murder of 9 in Munich earlier in 2016 by a German citizen of Iranian descent, were used to the same ends. As the core period of media coverage of arriving refugees waned, so two of the key countries responsible for the intake of new arrivals announced measures to dramatically reduce their intake. Both Chancellor Merkel of Germany and Prime Minister Löfven of Sweden capitulated to pressure from the political right, with Sweden shocking many within the EU and beyond by implementing the harshest restrictions possible under EU law for the intake of refugees, leading left-leaning newspapers such as the UK's Independent to write headlines such as "Sweden has done so much for refugees, now it's turned its back on them." Now it is actually the hardest country to obtain a visa for Sweden in the EU region. Given its history of accepting refugees and the rapid rise of far-right politics, contemporary Sweden and its cities is an interesting case study in the clash between a social democratic cosmopolitan sensibility and a retrenchment into the insular politics of populist nationalism. The far-right Sweden Democrats' clarion call against immigration and the intake of refugees is a common one. Threats to national culture, a dilution of national values, an increase in violence in cities, a decrease in social cohesion, increased unemployment, Islamification, giving money to foreigners instead of real Swedes, and a deep mistrust of multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism. As noted in the UNHCR study I mentioned earlier, the economic benefits of the intake of immigrants and refugees is rarely discussed in European media, and as it came out of our interviews also with these activist groups and art groups who are dealing with trying to help and support refugees, there's also this categorical difficulty. Of course, are they refugees, economic migrants, and a human issue in a way, in many ways, is reduced to economic status. As Ben Habib says, there's a lot of discussion over this terminology, whether we should call them refugees or migrants. These people are coming from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea, and Libya. All of these countries are in states of either civil war or, as in Syria, post-war conflict situations that still have not settled down, as in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. According to the 1951 Refugee Convention definitions, individuals who are fleeing their country because of persecution, which can take the form of civil war or a threat to life based on ethnicity, religion, etc., are to be considered convention refugees. It is hard to disagree that these are areas of the world where the lives of certain human beings are in danger. So there is reason to call these people refugees, but it is very much contested. And a 2016 IMF report on the impact of the arrival of refugees and migrants on national economies. A number of the far-right nightmare scenarios are debunked in this report. For example, on the topic of taking jobs from native workers, a theme many in the US are familiar with from President-elect Trump's debates, his discourse. The IMF notes that the impact of the intake of displaced populations on native workers is likely to be short-lived and small. And as we know, IMF is not a left-leaning or liberally minded organization, but this is their report, and we do know that it is true in economic terms. So they say their impact is likely to be short-lived and small, the strain they put on the economy, and that past experience with both economic and humanitarian immigration indicates that adverse effects on wages or employment are limited and temporary, possibly because of low substitutability between immigrants and native workers, and because investment usually increases in response to a larger workforce. But these are facts and figures that we hear very little through the media, more complex and yes, drier stories about nuts and bolts of economics and migration. These facts, however, are often subsumed with the larger discourses of cultural integration and religious suitability, and religion and culture basically replacing racism. It's like we often hear, oh, I'm not a racist. It's about culture, it's about their religion, but of course it is according to the colonial theory as well, it needs to be discussed within the discourse of racism. This minimization should lead us to address a lesser discussed but increasingly important element of considering cosmopolitanism in relation to migration, the formation of transnational and local networks of far-right politics in the service of patriotic populism and how these materialize in the lived environment of the city. When we talk about independent media or radical media, we often think of the left, but as we know historically in the United States, also in Europe, radical right is far better organized and effective and efficient, unfortunately. Returning to the question of cosmopolitanism and what it tells us, while legal and political veins of cosmopolitan thought address institutional questions and cosmopolitan deficits in global or regional, national, urban terms, mediation-related dimensions bring under scrutiny questions having to do with media's role in representing reality, allowing for imaginative travel and individual positioning and identity formation, or to use Stuart Hall's terms, questions related with being and becoming in our media cities. The cosmopolitan framework is also one that brings in moral and ethical dimensions, which are often conflated. Maybe we can talk about it during the question and answer session, in relation to notions of hospitality and solidarity. As a scope, it accommodates pushing these questions beyond the confines of the nation state without disregarding territorial aspects and urban dynamics. Very frequent conflictual events, which are heavily mediated, continues to place us as audiences in a transnational space of laws where we relate to these events in terms of either embracing a global cosmopolitan notion of citizenship and the moral and ethical responsibility and sense of solidarity such a position calls for, or not. It also notes in his critique of approaches to mediated cosmopolitanism in the formation of a world interior space through the consumption of global media, he says, far from this leading to an unambiguous expansion of horizons of the individual, as the claims of mediated cosmopolitanism would lead us to expect, an opposite process is observable in which the formation of the world interior leads to the disappearance of the exterior into a process of immunization of the media consumer against this exterior. Of course, we heard these arguments before in media and communication studies, Neil Postman being one of them, amusing ourselves to that, being desensitized as our exposure to media increases. Whether we agree with this position or not depends on our orientation in our thinking, of course. What kind of cosmopolitanism does the city mediate, we could ask. These questions also call for grounding an empirical backbone. In other words, thinking media space and city physical space, urban space, in relation to each other, not separately or as opposed to each other. Such analyses need to bring in other perspectives and disciplinary lenses such as critical geopolitics. My interest in my research has been in the socially negotiated character of media appropriations and uses, aiming to discern the different ways in which media practices relate to cosmopolitanism and vice versa, how cosmopolitan practices relate to the media and everyday mediations in the city. This involves questions of representational dimensions of media landscape and how we are positioned in our mediated life worlds. Today's social media in particular offers different possibilities and forms of positioning. As pointed out by Madino and Miller, contemporary polymedia environments enable increasingly dynamic modes of mediated interaction. A particular device such as a smartphone can be used for a plethora of different forms of communication. Media also bring identity processes to the front. While we might act based on how everybody else acts on social media, we might also be a contrarian or a collectivist, or a hipster, cosmopolitan, etc. There's also the geopolitical understanding of interrelations and how shifts at scalar institutional level occur and how social actors become positioned vis-a-vis each other. Some scales, such as that of nation-state, might become destabilized or challenged, and this was a big part of the globalization discourse in the 1990s, as we know, while others formerly less prominent or dormant scales or institutions might gain legitimacy and rise to a position of claiming power. What I take on board here is critical geopolitics, a critical geopolitical understanding of these dynamics, which have to do with the popular aspects and how speech acts travel in a mediatized world, including those in the city through expressive interventions, not media, but also interventions like graffiti and street art. Critical geopolitics center around four key issues: space, identity, vision, and statecraft, which it identifies at the core of geopolitical inquiry. So media and media studies take on a central role here, obviously. This kind of an approach has to do with constructivist understanding of space, social construction, and sustenance of collective understandings of places and people beyond our borders and how they are represented in films, comics, and in other venues. In other words, how we are positioned globally in the urban sphere. So two parentheses I'd like to open here in relation to the geopolitics of mediation are temporalizing spaces and spatializing times. We can identify the current characteristics of Europe, of the EU, of the Middle East, and place those into a longer historical perspective that highlights how these places have been shaped by interests and actors at specific time periods. There is also a lot to be said about representations of space-times. Again, if you turn to popular culture examples, say science fiction, it is not uncommon to see apocalyptic narratives visualized in the form of desert dunes in Middle Eastern village markets where the charming protagonist is literally being grabbed by every vendor while he's being kind and generous to everyone and trying to get the bad guy. So I mean, those films provide excellent examples of spatialization time and vice versa. I think I would like to actually, I will not say more about critical geopolitics. I just wanted to sort of use that as a short sort of parenthesis related to what I'm talking about, positionality in media, but I would like to end with this image. These are all media stories. Many of you are art experts and I'm not. This is an image I'm sure that you are familiar with. This is Dali's Geopolitics child watching the birth of the new man. It's first shown at Dali's solo exhibition in New York in 1943. It shows Dali's shifting perception of the war then in progress in Europe. In his notes for the work, Dali wrote parachute, carnescence, protection, cupola, placenta, Catholicism, egg, earthy distortion, etc. And painting is entitled Geography Changes Its Skin in Historic Germination. So this new man is coming out of North America, the United States. There's blood running out of the crack in the egg, and the new man's hand has England firmly in its grasp. In the foreground, two figures are watching, one an adult, the other a small child, and there's Jesus I think on the right hand side of the picture. It's basically U.S. is emerging as a superpower. Unfortunately, in Montego, Donald Trump came out of this egg, to our surprise or not, but to our disappointment very much. So the point I would like to make in relation to how we use media communication studies and how we bring in other perspectives such as critical geopolitics is we need to see these things as in flux. What does Europe look like, how it is shifting, and how our cities are taking shape, using this as a sort of analogy or as a metaphor. But I think it's a very impressive, or I really find that it's a very impressive picture, painting describing what was going on at the time. So I would like to end with that. I think I went over my time, so thank you for listening.